Any of you who know me know that I normally don't wear a suit. But for some strange reason, last week I decided to go get a suit. And after I got the suit and it was heading out, the manager of the store said, "Oh, is that your Vanagon out there?" It's like, "Yeah." "Do you surf?" He's like, "Yeah." So we started talking about surfing and places we've been, and then I made the mistake. I said, "Yeah, the last few weeks ago, I was surfing this great spot in Liberia." And so we talked a little bit more, and then I left. Well, yesterday when I went back to pick up the suit, I arrived about 15 minutes before opening. And I pulled up right in front of the door, in the Vanagon again, and I saw the guy come to the door. I thought, oh, he remembers me. He's going to open up early for me. Well, he cracked the door, stuck his head out and said, "Don't come any closer." "What was your name again?" So I gave him my name. He brought my suit, and he said, "Don't touch me." I said, "Well, you had those shoes you were wanting to sell me." He's like, "I would be happy to sell you the shoes, but I'm afraid of you. You've been to that place." And he refused to let me in. So I kind of felt a little bit, I think, about the fear that this is provoking. Not that I hadn't felt it myself. I lived under constant fear while I was there. In fact, just hearing Jillian talk, I started to get those feelings again, remembering what it was like to have Ebola lurking in the background no matter what we did. Within the first week or so that I was there, we had to de-stress sometimes, and so Jillian arranged for us to go meet with a doctor from MSF, Doctors Without Borders, at a little cafe. So we walked in, but of course, before walking in, we had to wash our hands in the bleach solution, and the waitress had to check our temperature, and then we go in, and we almost were ready to shake hands, but then the MSF Dr. Cameron, he said no, and so we kind of bumped elbows and sat down, and we tried to have small talk for a little bit, but we just couldn't stay away from talking about Ebola. And it was a profound conversation for me because he said 2 points that kind of, even after being there for 6 weeks and all the thinking and interacting and being in that environment and dealing with Ebola, I think those are still the two key elements for me about the whole crisis. And the first one is he said that the ineffectiveness of the response to the Ebola crisis has nothing to do with material resources. There's plenty of money. He said it's a problem of human resources, and even told Jillian and I, now don't get Ebola, because if another American gets it, we're going to lose the entire American human resources. And not that he cared about us personally, but he was worried about the... And the second thing was, he said the only real solution is eventually we're going to have to go to home care. And I kind of modified that a little bit to say maybe not home care, but maybe community care. Why is human resources the problem and not money? I think is probably pretty obvious for those of us tonight who've been feeling the fear listening to Jillian talk. We're afraid. Healthcare workers are one of the highest risk groups, has a high mortality rate, extremely contagious. As everything that she said, that's why we're afraid of it. But I think that it's a deeper problem. I think it's a spiritual problem. In the West, and in America in particular, we've bought into the ideology of self-preservation. This is in direct opposition to one of the core concepts of Christianity, which still is claimed as the religion of most of America and the Western countries. Christianity was founded on the teachings of Jesus, who promoted the core value of self-sacrifice as opposed to self-preservation. When giving his last instructions to his disciples, Jesus told them, love one another. Earlier in one of his most famous speeches, the Sermon on the Mount, he said, love your enemies. Defining what that meant came in a conversation he had with a religious leader who asked him which was the greatest of God's commandments. So Jesus replied, well, indirectly, he asked him, what do you think it is? And the guy said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, yeah, that's right. But the guy wanted to kind of define it a little more, so he asked Jesus that question, who is my neighbor? Now, anyone here at Loma Linda University, you've probably seen the statue there in the middle of the campus right in front of the church. the story of the Good Samaritan, a very famous story. But I'd like to read it to you tonight because I think it's pertinent to our response to Ebola. It's found in Luke 10:30-37. So Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down the road, but when he saw the injured man, passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came up to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was traveling came to where the injured man was, and when he saw him, he felt compassion for him. He went up to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins, gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever else you spend, I'll repay you when I come back this way.' Which of these 3 do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in religious law said, "The one who showed mercy to him." So Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." Now, I don't think that Samaritan, if he had asked the question, "Is it a safe place for me to care for this guy?" he probably would have walked on the other side of the road as well. Because certainly, if this is where the guy got attacked and robbed, those guys were probably not far off. It was probably an isolated part of the road, and it was probably dangerous. But he didn't think about that. He didn't think about his own self-preservation. He thought about the other guy who was suffering and needed his help. He wasn't thinking, how can I save my life? How can I prevent my own death? He was thinking about the other guy. So these 2 questions, is it safe? Is it worth risking my life? These are questions that I hear all the time. I've been in Africa for 10 years. We've had hundreds of volunteers come out there, and almost always one of the first questions they ask is it safe? And at first I would try and reassure them saying, well, yes, it's very safe and all the reasons why, it's this and this. And of course, it's just as dangerous or probably more dangerous to get on Interstate 10 and drive as it is to come to Africa. What is safety anyway? But later on I started thinking, actually, that's not the right answer. Because, no, it's not safe. But since when has that been an issue for a believer, for someone who calls himself a follower of Jesus? Since when has safety become the most important thing? Do American soldiers go to safe places? When fighting against evil, one is never safe. How many American soldiers lost their lives fighting Hitler and the Nazis during World War II? Yet we hold these guys up, these brave soldiers up as heroes, yet think people who go to West Africa to fight Ebola are foolish. When I was deciding to go there, I didn't tell anyone because I knew everyone would try and convince me not to go to Liberia because it would not be safe. But what would have happened if all of those Americans who were fighting Hitler decided, no, I might get killed over there in Europe. I better flee to Canada. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? We'd all be speaking German. There's a reason we used to call America the home of the brave, but can we still call it that today? Can you imagine Jesus, before coming down to this earth, having one final meeting with the heavenly hosts and with God and saying, I'm not so sure, is it safe down there? No, of course it's not safe. He came down to sacrifice his life, to give up his life. That was his purpose. I'm going down there to show them how much I love them. No, it's not safe. In fact, God probably said, no, they'll hound you your whole life, seek ways to destroy you, arrest you, beat you, and crucify you. Jesus was concerned about self-preservation. He had a very funny way of showing it. He deliberately did things that would get him killed. The second question, is it worth risking my life? Is just as simple to me, but it may not be as immediately obvious. So let me try and explain to you using something personal that happened to me. My wife and I got married in 2004, and we wanted to have children, and we tried to have children for many years and were unable to. Finally, through IVF, in 2011, my wife got pregnant with twins. And so we were ecstatic, and in June, she got pregnant before in 2010, but she delivered in June 2011, and Adam and Miriam. And 3 months later, we headed back to Chad. And in December of 2011, both Adam and Miriam got malaria. And I remember it very well, of course, for many reasons. It was a Friday. It was my wife and I's 7th wedding anniversary. And we celebrated that by starting our children on quinine drips. And Saturday morning, Adam died. Needless to say, it was traumatic. And we had a lot of response from people, and I'm happy to say most people were gracious and comforting. But there were some, of course, who asked the question that maybe some of you are thinking, why would you bring your kids to Africa? Didn't you know there's malaria there? You knew you were exposing them to malaria? You knew they could die, and you took them over there? What kind of parent are you? Yeah, we knew that. We knew we were taking a risk. But we asked ourselves a question afterwards. I mean, we didn't ask it at the time. Maybe in our minds we did, but not. And we did a lot of analyzing in our hearts afterwards. We asked the question, how many Chadian children, how many African children would have died if we hadn't come to Africa? How many hundreds had we saved over the years? So then we asked ourselves a harder question. How many African children was our son worth? Can you put an estimate on that? How many African babies would I have to say the sacrifice of my firstborn was worth it? So we began to understand a little bit more what Jesus meant when he replied to Peter's question in Mark 10 about, what about us? We've given up everything to follow you. What benefit for us? So Jesus said, I tell you the truth, there is no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the gospel who will not receive in this age 100 times as much. Homes, brothers, sisters, children, mothers, fields, all with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. Many who will be first will be last, and the last first. So we had our answer. We are going to see our son again, and even if we saved one kid, it was worth it, because I cannot say that my kid is worth more than even one Chadian kid. So when I was first asked to go to Liberia, I think Dick was wise to ask my wife first, and she, of course, gave the go-ahead. I don't know what that says about what she thinks of me. But I was sitting comfortably in the courtyard of my Muslim hosts in the Chadian town of Abéché, where we'd been invited a few years ago to open up a new hospital. And I was lying on a mat, drinking tea, wearing my comfortable Arab pajamas, or robes as some people call them, and enjoying the hospitality when I got the call. And I have to say, my first reaction was stark terror. My insides just froze up. In all my years of medical training and all the things I've experienced and seen in Africa, I've never really been afraid. I mean, not truly deep down, and especially not of anything medical, HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, whatever, but Ebola. I remember hearing about that in medical school, and you just hear, just not very often, but you hear Ebola, and it's just scary. It, kill 90% mortality, bleeding out of your eyes, but I realized I needed to face my fears and not be overcome by them. And then I asked myself the question, because at first, my first reaction was, well, I'm doing something important here in Chad. And what's going to happen if I die of Ebola? But I asked myself the question, how many Liberian lives is my life worth? Was I so important or special that my life was worth more than any other human being? My first egotistical reaction was, yes, I'm special. But as I dug deep and I reflected on my core values, I realized that in the sight of God, yeah, I was special, but so was every single Liberian and West African. So I came to the conclusion that if I only saved one Liberian life, it would be worth it for me to go to Monrovia, even if I died of Ebola. That was an intellectual reason that I used to overcome my gut, powerful emotion telling me to hightail it in the opposite direction. So does self-sacrifice actually work versus self-preservation? it's a nice theory, and maybe we think, well, we'll get rewarded in, pie in the sky later on. But interestingly enough, self-preservation actually leads to self-destruction. Just like those American soldiers, if they had fled the war and refused to fight, we'd all be speaking German and be under Nazi rule. Self-preservation in World War II would have ultimately led to defeat and self-destruction. Self-sacrifice, on the other hand, won us that victory in every war that has been fought since. And fighting Ebola is a war. Without self-sacrifice, the war will be lost. And ultimately, we will meet self-destruction. Ebola is not going away on its own, and it's certainly not going down without a fight. So let's do some math. How many Liberians would I have to prevent getting Ebola in order to make it worthwhile for me to actually lose my life? In order to actually make it so that we're gaining ground against this thing that, according to Jillian, we're losing the whole battle. It's just astronomically advancing against all that we've been doing. Well, what would I have to do? How many Liberians would I have to prevent getting Ebola in order to make a positive impact, even if I eventually died of Ebola? 2. Right? If I keep 2 Liberians from getting Ebola, even if I die, as long as I haven't contaminated anyone else, that's a victory gained. 1 life lost, 2 lives saved. We're making headway. So at that rate, sure, it would cost a lot of lives, but we would eventually win. If we had enough people going over there, saving 2 people even though they were dying. Eventually, the self-sacrifice would win the war against Ebola. Fortunately, by going over there, I'd probably be doing a lot more than just preventing 2 Liberians from getting infected. And the likelihood of my dying is also much less than 100%. I spent 6 weeks there, and I'm alive. And I'm not even contagious anymore, so you can shake my hand. Not that I was ever contagious. But the bottom line is, while it's risky to go fight Ebola, the spirit of self-sacrifice that it would take to put our lives on the line would ultimately save us from a global pandemic. If we continue to run and hide out of fear, in the end, Ebola will win, and our biggest fears will be realized. As Dr. Cameron said, the biggest problem in the fight against Ebola is the lack of human resources. When will we stop asking, is it safe? Is it worth risking my life? And apply the principle of self-sacrifice, which is the only way to win this war. Of course, once we decide to fight a war, even if we know we can win, the way we fight will determine how many casualties we suffer. Because it's not, we want to win, yeah, but we also want to do it with as few casualties as possible. So I'd like to expand on the second idea that Cameron launched that day in the cafe. And I think that is going to involve treating patients in local communities. There's a lot of bugs to work out. I'm certainly not some person who's doctor of public health who knows how to organize these things. So I'm just going to throw out my ideas out there, and hopefully some brighter heads, if they think it's worthwhile, can latch on to it. But this is my very limited 6-week immersion into Ebola idea of how to fight it, at least in Liberia. I can't say elsewhere. And having lived in Africa for 10 years, I think I do understand a little bit of the culture. Not a lot, but a little bit of it. And I think it has to be culturally appropriate or it will not work. So I'd like to just read you a little bit from a letter that I wrote to the Minister of Health right before I left. He came to visit our hospital when he found out we were closing to try and convince us not to close because he knew we were one of the few places where non-Ebola patients were getting treatment. And so I wrote him this letter. And I'm not going to read you all of it, just all the greetings and everything. But I think the 3 components of my Liberian-based, cost-effective alternative to fighting the Ebola pandemic. Number 1, community-based treatment centers. So we need infrastructure. The problem, like Jillian said, MSF trying to build these tent cities, 120 beds, immediately overrun. So they said we'll go up to 400. It took them 6 weeks. By the time we left, they only got up to 160 and were completely overrun. They were trying to build new infrastructure that would meet their very stringent requirements for infection control, isolation, everything, which is nice if you have the infrastructure and the resources to do it. But it's not keeping up and it's losing the battle. So my idea is all the schools are closed in Liberia because of Ebola. So every community has a school, and a school has a wall around it, a school has buildings, a school has running water, a school has sanitation facilities, open up the schools as community treatment centers. Each community will decide what building they want to use, and they need to come up with an existing building that they can use for their Ebola community-based treatment center. To staff it, as Jillian mentioned, we're now long enough into this thing, we've got survivors. These people are like gold. And if you've got 4,000 people who've died, you've got 4,000 survivors, that means you have 4,000 people waiting to be used to treat Ebola patients risk-free. So have every community identify in their community those people who are now immune to Ebola and get them to work and pay them whatever it takes to get them to do the work and take care of the Ebola patients. To protect themselves, you still want to protect them because they might be exposed to other things. Let's buy them some rain jackets, some rain pants, some nice big, washing the floor rubber gloves, give them masks so they're protected, and then just spray it down, reuse it, dunk it in bleach water when they're finished in between patients, and let them take care of it and pay them 3, 4, 5 times what a nurse would make, and that would still only be about $500 a month. Pretty cost effective compared to what you'd pay an expat. And for patient-wise, any suspected case should be brought immediately to the treatment center, and the Ministry of Health notified to come and test its blood so we can confirm, is this really Ebola or not? And they should not leave the treatment center until they've been declared free of the virus by a negative test. Done at least 4 days after the start of symptoms, because you can have a negative test up to 4 days after you start having symptoms. So if you come the first day, have a negative test, don't think you're home free. Medication and supplies, Jillian mentioned a few of these, so I'll just run through it quickly. Fluid, at least 6 liters a day, orally if possible. An antiemetic, some kind of medicine to keep them from vomiting so they can keep those fluids down. An antibiotic, cheap one like broad spectrum, like ciprofloxacin. Malaria treatment, there's the Artemether, lumefantrine, some of these Artemisia derivative things that are very easy on the stomach. Quinine's very hard, but so give them something easy, treat them. Even if they aren't sick from malaria, they probably have malaria anyway, and they're going to, with their decreased immunity, they're going to manifest their malaria. And then oral potassium and magnesium, as she mentioned, that sudden death you talk about, if a patient dies suddenly, suspect Ebola in these regions. Well, why are they dying suddenly? Low potassium, low magnesium. Guess what has high potassium and high magnesium? Bananas. And bananas are readily available anywhere in Liberia, so make sure they eat 3 or 4 bananas a day. Selenium. It's so risk-free and has such potential, even if it's just not very good studies from maybe a scientific point of view. We can't really take the time to do studies. We got to do the low-risk things and just treat these patients with anything that might work. So give them selenium, 400 micrograms, 3 times a day. There's a lamivudine. It's an antiretroviral. There's a Liberian doctor out in the bush who treated 15 patients, Ebola-positive patients with lamivudine. 13 of them survived. Okay, that's a small study, but if I had Ebola, I'm taking lamivudine. I mean, if someone gets a needle stick here with an HIV-positive patient, we put them on 3 antiretrovirals for a month and don't think anything of the side effects, and yet we don't want to put them on 1 antiretroviral when they could die, a 50% chance of dying of Ebola because they might have a little liver toxicity. Give them lamivudine. It's readily available over there, and anyone can have it. Put them on it. Give them chlorine piled up to the ceiling. That will kill Ebola in about 10 seconds. Jill and I we like to credit God, but I don't think God was giving me any special favors over the Liberians. But I think I was using chlorine a lot more than most of the Liberians. I was constantly, there were times when I had to go into a delivery. I remember one time it was a breach and it was stuck there, and I just had to run in, throw on some gloves and pull it out. And then as I did, a gush of amniotic fluid shot out all over my pants and on over my shoes. I immediately said to the midwife, fill that basin with water, dump in 2 capfuls of chlorine, and dump that on my pants and on my shoes. I didn't care about having wet pants and sloshing around in chlorine water. That was Ebola. I didn't want it on my skin for more than a few seconds. So using chlorine, washing everything, and then give them all the cleaning supplies, towels, basins, gloves they need. Quarantine. The communities, led by their leaders, should quarantine those living in the same house as the Ebola patient. One of our patients that came in was admitted by Dr. Martin, then started vomiting up blood. I was like, this is too suspicious. We got to send him out. We took him out to the courtyard in a wheelchair, and he almost immediately died. So we were very suspicious this guy probably had Ebola. We called up the Ministry of Health to come get the body. It took him 3 days. The next day, the family came to get it. I gave him the death certificate, and I had to put suspicious for Ebola on it. They went back and brought their community leaders back and said, is this really true? I said, yes. So the community leaders turned to the family, said, you're going to stay in your home for 3 weeks. We as a community are going to cook for you and bring you food. They're already taking the initiative. Let's work with that. Let them bring food and water to those being quarantined so they can prevent further exposure. We don't want those people wandering out again looking for food because they're not getting fed. Number two, the second thing besides the infrastructure is testing for Ebola. In the country, as the time we left, I think there was, 2 facilities to test for Ebola, and they could do about 50 tests a day. Not even close to the amount needed to really be able to determine who has it and who doesn't. So put your money, put your millions of dollars into getting some lab things there and getting phlebotomists running around the town and get them coming at least morning and evening to these community health centers and drawing blood on everybody and getting some results back. And, you don't need a $70,000 4x4 Land Cruiser with 2 spare tires on the roof, a big jack, a winch, and a big cattle grill on the front to drive around paved streets. That's not a good use of resources. There's taxis all over the place. Send the phlebotomists out in taxis. Costs a couple bucks to get them around town. And cost effective, plus you're feeding into the local economy by supporting local businesses. Collection and disposal of bodies, number 3. Like Jillian mentioned, exposure to the dead body is at least 50% of the transmission. And then even the people who want to get rid of the bodies, sometimes we've heard of bodies staying there for at least 5 days before the body collection teams came. In our neighborhood, Sincor in Liberia, there where the hospital is, it was the International Red Cross. I don't want to mention name, but maybe someone's here from the International Red Cross. I'm not being too critical. I'm just stating a fact. To pick up one body, it took them about 10 people, 2 brand new Toyota Hilux pickup trucks, a brand new Toyota Land Cruiser, and a brand new large diesel flatbed truck, roaring through town with sirens and lights blazing to pick up one body. My idea is there's all these guys in these little beat-up Peugeot pickup trucks hauling beer and soda around town for a few bucks a day. Give them the gear, show them how to put it on. 2 guys, third guy, also with the gear, has a backpack with a sprayer, fill it with diluted chlorine, give them body bags, and they're on call. Each community has their own group of these guys on call. Ministry of Health gets a call for a body pickup. These guys go in, and they go in, grab the body, stick in the body bag, then the spray guy sprays the body bag down, sprays them down, sprays everything impossible around down with chlorine water, and then take the body off, throw it into a crematorium and burn it. I know you'd like to know if it really had Ebola or not, but we're trying to stop a pandemic. Just burn it and assume it's Ebola. Don't open the body bag up, draw its blood out, and expose a lot more people to Ebola. And then pay these guys by the rapidity of their response. If they deliver that body within 3 hours of the call, they get $25, which is about a quarter of a month's salary for a nurse. If you want to pay them more, I don't care. Pay them however much it takes, but do it a sliding scale. I'm just throwing numbers out there. $25. If they could get it within 3 to 6 hours, $20. 6 to 12 hours, $15. 12 to 24 hours, $10. After 24 hours, $5. Motivate them to pick up these bodies and deliver them. And right now they're saying, well, we can't dispose of them. We've only got 2 crematoriums in all of Monrovia. How hard is it to burn a body? In India, they managed to do it for thousands of years without anything fancy. How hard is it to build a cement structure, throw in some charcoal, throw in a body, dump petrol over it, and light it on fire? Got to just have places where you can burn the bodies and decontaminate them so that people are not getting exposed to Ebola. Would not take much resources. So that's my short, brief way of maybe not genius, but certainly not genius, but something's not working there, and we need to be thinking of other ideas. And I think part of the problem is the Liberians don't trust the government, they don't trust the NGOs, and no one is going into the community saying, what can you guys do? How can you contribute? What needs to be done? And I'm talking to, these are not just ideas I come up on my own, it's people who give me the ideas, I've shared them with other people, and come to that conclusion. So, where am I here? Too many papers. Here we go. So we'll take an army of people who are unafraid. Unafraid and willing to sacrifice for the common good and to save humanity from a great evil. Ebola is not going away on its own this time. Some people, of course, freaking out and calling it one of the last plagues, as described in the biblical book of Revelation. Whether or not that's the case, the book of Revelation does describe those who get the ultimate victory over evil in Revelation 12:11. It says, "They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die." We should not let ourselves be paralyzed by fear. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said in his 1933 inaugural address, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." Jesus came to free us from that kind of fear. Hebrews 2:14-15. "Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, Jesus likewise shared in their humanity, so that through death he could destroy the one who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and set free those who were held in slavery all their lives by their fear of death." As believers, we are called to a higher calling. We are to follow the Lamb, the example of Jesus. We are to show our fellow human beings the greatest love. As Jesus says in John 15:12-13, "My commandment is this, to love one another just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, that one lays down his life for his friends." So let's fight Ebola. Let's not love our lives unto death. Let's be willing to sacrifice our lives if necessary for the common good of humanity. Let's help save our West African brothers and sisters by showing them the greatest love there is, and in the end, maybe we'll save ourselves as well.